Proudly presented by Pence Homes and part of the Hitting the Hardwood podcast network. This is Links Happy Hour. Yo, welcome, Links fans. Welcome back to another off-season episode of Links Happy Hour, the podcast where Links basketball is always on special. My name's Terry Horstman. I host the show. Thank you for being here once again in the early stages of this rollicking, ridiculous offseason that's getting more rollicking and ridiculous by the day. Very glad to have you with us, and I'm very excited about the show today. My good friend Jackie Powell is here. Jackie, of course, my New York Liberty counterpart over at the 9 basketball. Jackie also does a bunch of league-wide stuff for us at the 9 for NBC Sports as well. A bunch of other places. Jackie's amazing and was at the finals, so we get into a lot of finals talk. There's a lot of kind of league-wide talk on the show today, just because I feel like it's important context to frame the finals that happened, and then also how they lead into this offseason. A couple housekeeping things to point out, though. Jackie and I talked on Wednesday. It is now Friday, as I'm talking to you, Friday morning, October 24th. And we talk a lot of coaching carousel stuff. And just about probably 2, maybe 3 hours after our recording ended, Sandy Brondello hired to be the first head coach in the history of the Toronto Tempo. That had not happened at the time of our conversation, so we refer to a lot of coaching stuff in the future tense. You'll hear me say dumb things like, I think Sandy to Seattle would be a great fit. Sandy's not going to Seattle. She's going to Toronto. This is also before Jose Fernandez was hired by the Dallas Wings, a longtime University of South Florida coach, Jose Fernandez. So the carousel is, spinning and spinning, and we're close to an end. As of now, Seattle has not hired their next head coach. Maybe by the time you're listening to this, that has changed. So I apologize for the lack of luck in timing for the conversations this week, but still lots of great stuff. Jackie has covered Sandy for years and has just a lot of context, really important context, and just a lot of great reporting on the things that went wrong with New York this year, why Sandy was on the job market in the first place. And I'm linking to multiple pieces of reporting that Jackie has done in the show notes, both a very well done feature that she did about Sandy as she was fired or relieved of her duties or contract not renewed, whatever the way the New York Liberty worded that transaction. It's a great piece. It's wonderful reporting and beautifully written, as always, from Jackie. And then also we talk a lot about the Aces status of a dynasty and the complex ways in which we'll view the legacy for this organization at this point in time. A lot of evolution of Becky Hammon and a bunch of other stuff as well. We do get into some other off-season takes and things like that. So let's get right into it. My conversation with Jackie Powell right here on Links Happy Hour. This episode of Links Happy Hour is brought to you by Pence Homes. The team at Pence Homes has experience working with first-time home buyers, folks selling their first home and buying their next place, to people looking to downsize. With the best tools, technology, and trusted vendors to help with any home project, Pence Homes is a top choice for buyers and sellers. For more info and to set up a time to meet with Nate and the team to talk about your home buying or selling needs, visit PenceHomes.com. That is Pence, PentzHomes.com. Very excited for today's interview for Link's Happy Hour. Joining us on the show now, one of my truly favorite people to work with in basketball media, my colleague at the Nine, Jackie Powell, joining us this morning. Jackie, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm all right, Terry. Thank you for having me. Thank you for that very kind introduction. You and I always have so much fun where we sort
We
of put our
do.
put our heads together when it comes
Mhm.
to discussing the WNBA and the teams that we cover.
Right. And I love that we get to do it on this show, on my show, because I don't have any kind of time limit. Where in the past, when we had you other producers to answer to, it was like, all right, wrap this up. Now we maybe our schedules might have something other to say about that. But I'm so happy to. This is the first I've talked with you post finals. You were there in what's been a pretty crazy month for you, basketball wise, work wise, and I know you also moved in the middle of kind of everything. So
Yes.
yeah, so throw a prayer up for Jackie, y'all. I want to start with the finals because I feel like for lots of reasons we haven't talked about the actual basketball part of the finals enough, and we're gonna get to the off court stuff very quickly and spend a lot of time there as well. But you were there, boots on the ground, cranked out a lot of great work, a lot of great writing on the finals as the Aces really emphatically stamped themselves as the dynasty of this era of the WNBA, winning 3 and 4, another MVP, another Finals MVP for Asia, and another championship for Becky. What is your main takeaway from this year's finals and the Aces sweeping the Phoenix Mercury in the fashion that they did?
My main takeaway is how excellent of a coach Becky Hammon is. And obviously, the news came out that there's going to be a documentary about her life and about obviously her years also in the NBA and the struggle to break the NBA's glass ceiling, which I have many thoughts about. We may get to them later, we may not. And but also, and I really do hope that this documentary does talk about her work with the Aces, because I think what really stood out to me was being able to see concrete examples of her evolution as a coach, as a people manager, as a psychologist, as someone with emotional intelligence, as a teacher, as a storyteller. I mean, there are pretty specific examples that I can point to of seeing Becky Hammon's evolution. Let's look at the basketball. It was very clear that she made sure to use her bench. She
Yeah.
essentially was using three and a half players throughout most of the postseason coming off the bench. And they had their very specific roles and they did them incredibly well. When she saw that Jackie Young didn't have her legs and was a bit burnt out, she made sure that Jackie Young got that rest and didn't practice during one of the practice days. These are things that the Becky Hammon of 2022, 2023 just wasn't doing. And then you sort of have, I guess, when you also think about the style of play too, when you think about the Aces in 2022 and 2023, they were very much so a transition team. The idea was you want to have the Aces playing, or a defense wants the Aces to play in the half court because they just weren't as good in the
Mhm.
half court. But you flash forward to 2025, this Aces team was a lot better at playing in the half court. Obviously, most teams are good in transition, but it's the thing where when you lose Kelsey Plum, who is just all speed,
Mhm.
it's like you have to pivot. And obviously, Chelsea Gray was getting older. Her skill set and what she was able to do is changing. She became her role sort of transformed from essentially being a playmaker, taking some tough shots when, the shot clock was running out, and then also just being a really switchable defender. Like I saw a lot of evolutions in the roles of certain players. And that comes from the head coach of sort of saying, like, okay, in order for us to win, we need you to do this. Obviously, it was also very impressive to see how the leadership of Asia Wilson manifested. Um, how she was able to call out her teammates and say, hey, like Chelsea Gray in particular, you know, I need something different from you. Because there were moments earlier this season where Chelsea Gray was not playing like a point guard. She was playing a bit more selfishly. And again, I go back to Becky because a big problem for the Aces in 2024 was how Asia just would not pass the ball. She did not trust her teammates. Because she had this vendetta about not winning MVP in 2023, it was just like it was all about Asia. And that led to the Aces struggling in 2024, in addition to their injuries. And so to see games during the WNBA finals where Asia is willingly passing the ball, she racks up games with 3 or 4 assists in addition to all the points she's scoring. That was something that stood out to me. And, you know, a lot of that credit goes to Becky Hammon for being able to get her superstar to pass the ball. So those are my takeaways. It was very much
Right.
so on how Becky was able to take a team that on paper had less talent than the Mercury, I think. Like, I think the Mercury just had more top high-end talent, but Becky found a way to really get the role players to buy in and to do their jobs and do them well.
Yeah, that was noticeable for sure, even from someone who wasn't there and getting the chance to talk to Becky, before and after games. You could see the differences between this championship and previous championship. So that's a pretty scary evolution considering how good of a coach she already was. And I want, this was kind of a meme going into the playoffs a little bit, and a joke that was being made, but it was the Aces were kind of a tale of two teams this year, where they were struggling mightily, culminating in a 53-point loss to the Lynx in Las Vegas. And then when that winning streak started after that game, people kind of joked like, oh, the worst thing the Lynx could have done is beat the Aces by 53 points and wake up that sleeping monster, which I felt kind of took credit away from the Aces a little bit, just the sentiment of that. But where's the explanation in what the Aces were doing in the first half of this season versus the second and all the way through the finals? Because they were kind of clunky early in the playoffs as well. They're still, very good, but they didn't have a perfect series against Seattle and certainly didn't against Indiana. And then they're able to, find that switch and flip it as emphatically as they did. Was it just kind of a matter of pressing the reset button? I know Asia told the team after that Minnesota loss, if you weren't embarrassed, then don't even come in the gym today, because that was embarrassing and it's not acceptable here. For that to happen, like, I'll add, people forget that game made people forget about the 31-point loss they had to the Lynx about a week earlier. um it seemed impossible at that time to imagine where we are now, and yet here we are. What do you think kind of the biggest differences, whether that be a Becky standpoint or an Asia one, to just really flip the season on its head like that?
So there's a lot to unpack there, right? I think let's start with the regular season, right? And sort of the huge losses to the Lynx. And then I think the playoffs is a separate monster there.
Right.
So during the regular season, it was very clear to me that the Aces were having trouble implementing a lot of the new. So
Right.
that meant Jewel Lloyd, that meant, even Melissa Smith. Like there were a lot of
Yeah.
new Dana Evans. And Dana Evans, my gosh, she came up
She was
huge,
sensational in the finals.
huge. And I I think she has a really wonderful story because this is a
Mhm.
player that, you know, was picked up by the Chicago Sky. She helped them a little bit, but then was relegated to the bench, didn't really have much of a role last season. There were some locker room issues. And then she gets traded to Vegas. And here she's in a spot where the coaching staff and the players around her see her value. And, it was really lovely talking to Dana after the Aces won because I
Mhm.
could just tell that she had been through so much to get to this point, to get to a point where she's winning a championship and she has some tangible involvement in it. But anyway, that's an aside on
Right.
Dana Evans. But there was, I mean, even Becky's coaching staff, she lost Tyler Marsh and Natalie Nakase, two people who had a lot of institutional knowledge. And so she
Mhm.
brings in these two former NBA coaches, and it's a lot for them to learn too. I mean, you know, there's a lot of talk about, oh, when you bring in NBA coaches, it's just basketball. How difficult of a transition can it be? The players are different. The personnel
Yeah.
is different. Some of the rules are different,
Yeah.
and so the ways in which the officiating works is different.
Way different. Yeah.
So there were a lot of growing pains for the Aces because there was just a lot new.
Mhm.
And I really think, and they had, did I mention Jewel Lloyd? I mean, or
Yeah.
maybe I did. Or
Quickly, but yeah, that's the one change I think everyone points to because it was the biggest one, moving a star like Jewel Lloyd to the bench. But that really seemed to unlock something different in everybody.
And again, I just go back to Becky because clearly Jewel Lloyd dealt with something in Seattle where the communication wasn't great.
Mhm.
It got to the point where there was an investigation into that coaching staff. And from talking to people, how I understand it is that the coaching staff took sides and there were cliques and it felt like high school and it was like Noelle Quinn and Skylar Diggins Smith and Nneka Ogwumike against Jewel Lloyd. Like
Yeek.
that's just not that's not ideal for a professional basketball setting. And so, you know, Jewel was told at some points that she was the face of the franchise and she had to be the number one. And then all of a sudden, no, she's not. And so I mean, when you make changes like that in role, you have to communicate well with players. And so it makes sense why she was so traumatized by what happened in Seattle. And so she goes over to Las Vegas, and clearly it's a more supportive environment because
Mhm.
she was previously friends with a lot of the players. And Becky's coaching philosophy is quite different. And the way how she connects to her players is what makes her stand out. She's very much so, she can be very hard on her players, but especially in these moments where they were dealing with some pretty um, terrible losses,
Yeah.
she really leaned into giving love and confidence to her players, which wasn't really how she got it done previously in 2022 and 2023. She was very hard on them and, but she realized, I need to sort of open up my emotional intelligence valve in my brain to be able to communicate with some of these newer players to Aces basketball and some of the newer coaches too. And so I think, they did like some trust exercises during the regular season. Like there was some really
Right.
fascinating stuff that she did. There was this egg situation they did
Right.
where the players were blindfolded and they each had partners, and that partner had to guide them through, like they put like these raw eggs on the ground, and so you couldn't step on the raw eggs, and it was about really trusting your partner and trusting those people. And you think, well, how does that translate to basketball? on the defensive end. The defensive end of the basketball is very much so about trust.
Hmm.
And it's about, not overthinking and trusting the people that you're with. And her creativity was just absolutely phenomenal. Um, and her balancing of being hard on her players while also giving them confidence and giving them a little bit of love and tender love and care. I mean, I think that was, and then the watching of the documentary, the Thunderbirds. I mean, just
Right.
all of these things, these team building exercises that got this group to really become much more tight knit. And that showed on the court. It showed during that 17-game win streak. I will say that their schedule helped them in the end. I will say they
Sure.
did
Yeah.
play some easier teams. They did have a long week of practice toward the end of the season to sort of
Hmm.
allow them to really do some of these potential team building and, implement new plays and just get rest. I mean, some of it is luck too. And I
Oh yeah.
think the Aces sort of got lucky in that last half of the season where it was like, okay, you know, we have some practice time, we have an easier schedule. Like, let's gain confidence about ourselves. And that's what that 17-game win streak allowed them to do. They gained a lot of confidence. And then I think that confidence was tested against Seattle and the Fever. And, I think there was a lot of talent on Seattle. I think the Storm also knew that Noelle Quinn's job was hanging by a thread, which was in part why you saw that as close as it was. Um, but when it came down to it, you know, the Aces had a better offense, they had better spacing, they had better coach.
Yep.
And a lot of the times when those things are in your favor, in some of those last second situations, the better team is going to come on top.
Yeah.
And the players that can make it or break it without something being drawn up are going to shine. And that's sort of what happened. Jackie Young with that putback against the Storm. With the Fever, I think the matchup did not favor the Aces. I think Aaliyah Boston was such a hard matchup for them
Yeah.
because the Aces, they play a more modern style. They like to play small, where it's just sort of like Asia and all the guards. And that was very hard for them to be successful against the Fever, where you have Aaliyah Boston, you have Natasha Howard, you have more size. And that was also why we were like, oh man, with more physicality from the Mercury, like, how is this going to work? But then you saw Alyssa Thomas was officiated differently in the finals than she was in the previous series.
Yep.
And
A lot of listeners of this podcast notice that.
um, and I think that really changed things a lot
Sure.
for the Aces. But also, the Mercury, they dealt with size issues too,
Mm.
because they weren't regularly playing Kalani Brown, who's 6'7". But they did
Yeah.
play her in that final game because it was sort of like Nate Tibbetts throwing the kitchen sink
Yeah.
at whatever he could.
I was kind of constantly asking, like, why not more Kalani Brown, just even in like spot situations here? And then saw her in the last game, and I was like, I think it's too late, Nate, but you know,
I mean, we
it
saw the
happens.
reason why she didn't play, right? Because
Hmm.
defensively, she's just a little bit slower. And it
Hmm.
was hard for her to keep up with Asia. But the offense, I mean, you know, the offense was good and she helped
Yeah.
them on that front. That there might be questions about, could you have sprinkled, as you said, could you have sprinkled her in earlier in the series?
Yeah.
But I mean, Alyssa Thomas was officiated in a different way. I mean, you could argue that the Mercury's whole defensive strategy was challenged in the finals because they
Hmm.
couldn't just be pushing people around, you
Right.
know. That was very much so curtailed. So I think that's sort of how the Aces did it. I mean, there was a lot of team building, there was a lot of hard work, and then there was some luck too.
Mhm.
I mean, in that Fever series, oh my God, like the Indiana Fever, that was absolutely remarkable.
Yeah.
And, people say, oh, well, with Caitlin, just imagine where they will get. I think the Fever are going to be really different with Caitlin. Like, I do not
Yeah.
think that current roster with Caitlin would have gotten to the place that they did. And I know that sounds so
Mm.
unconventional. But the reason I say it, and Terry, feel free to
No,
jump in if
I'm
you
right there with you on
you
this.
are.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, because part of why the Fever were able to work was it was essentially Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah
Mhm.
Boston. That was who the team was built around. You know, with Caitlin, the dynamics change so much. The on-court dynamics change a lot. The defensive schemes that you can do change a lot because her
Yeah.
defense is, I'll call it untapped. I'll call it immature.
It's
Um,
growing.
growing,
Yeah.
growing. And it just seemed like with Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston, they had this we're the underdog mentality. And I feel like that changes when you add Caitlin Clark to the equation. She is a
Yeah.
big mouth to feed. And so
Mhm.
Stephanie White is going to continue to have a challenge of how you get Caitlin Clark to buy in alongside those two other pieces that really establish synergy. It's
Yeah.
tough because it's like in the beginning of the season, you had this great pick and roll between Caitlin and Aaliyah. But then it
Mhm.
was like, okay, well, but then you have Kelsey. How do you see what I'm saying? So it's
Yeah.
like getting a big three to be in synergy, I think is going to be a challenge. And I don't think that current iteration would have made it
Yeah.
as far as the one that was playing did,
Yeah.
just because of the buy-in, the we're underdogs, the we're just going to play as hard as we can mentality there.
Yeah. It's not even suggesting Caitlin Clark is a candidate for the infamous Ewing theory or anything like that. It's just when she was out, there was just so much more clarity into what they're doing offensively. And then you don't have to worry about when they put that core together, I was like, obviously there's a lot of talent here, but Mitchell and Clark together defensively, I will always be concerned about. And they just, they found a way. And I came into this season, I've always thought Stephanie White is one hell of a coach, and she only further cemented that. All right, from Ace's praise to Ace's questions. Again, this is a Minnesota Lynx podcast, but we do have to give our flowers to the champs, and it's the off season, so give me a break. Um, all of this, much of this, is in your great column that went up on the Nine for Basketball Wednesday last Wednesday, which I will link to in the show notes. Everyone should go read this. It's interesting. You talk about this evolution with Becky and her players. Um, is interesting because I think a lot of people who probably aren't Aces fans and follow the team every day, like, didn't wasn't she just sued by Dearica Hamby for like this issue? And as that was going on, the Aces also were under investigation for salary cap circumvention. And as this finals takes place, it was taking place. So is an investigation into another issue of salary cap circumvention by I had the acronym. I just moved on from that part of it. The Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, which is ongoing. You asked owner Mark Davis about this during the finals. He technically answered the question without really giving you any information. But as you point out in this very, very good column, and it's an undeniable and complicated legacy of this team. What was it like to talk to Mark about that, or Mr. Davis? Should I be referring to him as? And how do you think it affects the way this team is thought of, and also the way it might be remembered, regardless of what punishments or consequences come whenever they do?
I mean, I think when you take a step back and look at the legacy, I can't help but think about cheating in other sports and cheating for other champions, right? So you think
Hmm.
about the Astros in Major League Baseball, you think about the Patriots in the NFL with their Spygate and their cheating, Deflategate.
Deflate gate, a bunch of other gates,
The
probably some
the
gates we never heard about. Yeah.
Right. And so I think what it highlights is for some teams, they make a calculation of that breaking the rules is worth it if you win. And I think the Aces are a prime example of that. Um, in the case of Becky Hammon and the things she said to Dearica Hamby and all of that, we go and we talk about her evolution again. It was incredibly striking the ways in which she spoke about Cheyenne Parker Tyus and the ways
Hmm.
in which the Aces handled Cheyenne Parker Tyus's pregnancy and her situation this season, you know, in a much more professional, mature manner. And so they clearly learned from the first experience with Dearica Hamby. But, you know, nothing is going to take that away. We're always going to remember those comments that were made. And it just really showed a lack of professionalism, you know? And so when it comes to Mark Davis and um the LVCVA, what he said to me was, I have no idea about the latest when it comes to the investigation. If you could tell me, that would be great. And you know our Howard Megdal, our editor in chief at the Nine Basketball and at the Nine Sports, has been knee deep into some of the key documents when it comes to this. And so, for those of you who are new, essentially the the LVCVA, the whole deal was to pay each Aces player $100,000 in addition to their salary. And, they wouldn't have to be doing much to earn
Right.
that
Just
$100,000.
exist in the world as Las Vegas Aces, essentially.
Yes, which is what is required of them under their WNBA contracts playing
Right.
for the Las Vegas Aces. And so, to be clear, this was a 2-year deal. And the reason I bring this up is because there was a report from Fox 5 Las Vegas that said that, that deal is set to expire. And President Steve Hill of the tourism authority, he said that, you know, at this current moment, it's not their plan to renew the deal. And, that could be because of a new collective bargaining agreement, which will give players a lot more money. But then he also said, but we haven't completely made a decision and we haven't
Right.
had the conversation yet. But obviously, our Howard Megdal found he acquired emails that went between the LVCVA and Aces Brass, essentially coordinating on, these payments and whatnot. And there was a
Hmm.
part of the email chain that said, oh no, let's not get the commissioner involved in this. And it's like, well, because it's breaking the rules.
Right.
And so, part of the issue with this investigation and part of why it's been such a standstill is because there is resistance in sending the proper documents over to the outside counsel that is running this.
Yeah.
And, I wrote in this column that, the LVCVA, they continue to slow walk turning over the documents, not only to Howard, who is trying to continue to report this out, um, and also to outside counsel. And this is obviously, it is a violation of legal obligations under Nevada state law. It's interesting that this all sort of gets pushed under the rug during these giant CBA negotiations and
Yeah.
during getting all of these expansion franchises in the door and announced. Like the league
Yeah.
has been very busy. And so I really just wonder, is this on hold, or is it a matter of the league not wanting to upset a major stakeholder in Mark Davis, especially in the middle of a
Sure.
CBA negotiation?
Yeah. All of that makes it crazy. I'm glad you mentioned like sort of the backdrop of cheating in other sports. I think, especially if you work for a fellow WNBA team, like I wouldn't be mad at anyone for being outraged by this. But as someone who covers this league and follows other leagues, like this isn't a Houston Astros situation, to me, which I find, far more egregious and disrespectful to the game, especially I think this in the WNBA. They can always, sort of fall back on the, you keep talking about paying women athletes more money, we're trying to give them more money. um
I
and
think, yeah, I think part of the discord also is you take a look at the different punishments. And so, as you know, Terry, and many of the listeners know, I do cover the New York Liberty. And so you have to take a look at the fact that the Liberty were fined $500,000 for flying charter flights.
right.
Um, it was reported that
No.
there were rumors about taking away draft picks.
Mhm.
That did not end up happening. Apparently, there was a deal between Kathy Engelbert and the size that brought this down to 500,000. But it's like 500,000 is that's a pretty big deal. Yet when you look at the Aces, for breaking the rules multiple times, what is their punishment? It's Becky Hammond gets, I believe, 2 or 3 games suspended,
Mhm.
and a draft pick of theirs is taken away. And this is a franchise that has not really done well in the draft and is not scouted well because of all the top end talent that they have. So
Right.
I think it's just worth taking a look at the level of punishment here. And I think that's something, it obviously makes the New York Liberty very upset.
Mhm.
And I'm sure it makes other teams upset as well.
Yeah,
So
I know one that's upset.
yes. So yeah, I mean, giving the players more money is not like, it's not completely akin to Deflategate or to the Astros cheating scandal and sign stealing and all of that, but
Right.
it's about just breaking the rules in general,
Right.
right?
And it's certainly akin to the reason why salary cap circumvention is kind of in everyday vocabulary now with the all the Pablo Torre finds out episodes about Kawhi Leonard getting his deal with aspiration. So yeah, but I guess it begs the point too, because we don't know what this punishment's going to be. But if it's similar to the last one and it's just a first round pick that's at
Slap on the
the
wrist.
yeah, if it's a first round pick that's at the end of the round when you have, we'll see with, CBA stuff that happens, but just all of this, it makes it hard to make any kind of punishment when there's going to be a new salary cap and we're looking at a work stoppage in about, 9 days here, possibly. uh, but yeah, I think it will, if people out there is like, all right, well, why don't I start a fake tree planting business and use all the money to pay fee to just stay in Minnesota longer and get whatever free agent Cheryl needs to get over the top. Yeah, let's do that. Fake trees, real money, not against the salary cap. Sounds good. We'll pay for it with a first round pick in 2034. who cares? So yeah, I think they should. I hope the league does something that at least discourages it. Listeners of this podcast who are also well versed in Minnesota Timberwolves lore remember when the Wolves got busted for it, and David Stern decided to make an example and basically took, like 100 draft picks away. It was actually 5, but still, I think people were, at least over the next 10 years, pretty frightened of salary cap circumvention. So yeah, definitely weird team, weird times, a lot to unpack, and you've done it beautifully. And it's not even the team on your beat. So I wanted to give kudos to you. And also just, this is, we're got to go a long way before WNBA games happen again. And we don't know exactly when that will be. I hope it's as planned. But yeah, thank you for that, Jackie. Can we talk about the teams we cover for real now?
Yes,
Let's.
absolutely. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to both of those teams.
There's just so much to talk about always. Thank you for bearing with me, Lynx fans, as we talked about the Aces and kind of the Mercury and the Indiana Fever a little bit there. But we pledged to cover the whole league on this episode just through a Lynx lens. We had it in our calendar all year, basically since last October. It was like, hey, this finals that went the distance was a great time. Let's do it again, but make it 7 games next year. And it was like, sounds great, Terry. I'm in. And early in the season, it looked like we were on a crash course for that. That did not come to be. Both our teams, or our beats, uphold, journalistic integrity here. Both our beats falling to the Phoenix Mercury in consecutive series. So I think, props to the Mercury for getting that done. Also, we're going to talk coaching carousel as well, as that kind of started with Sandy Brondello being relieved of basketball coaching, or just her contract would not be renewed, is the want to use the official language. Let's start with just kind of this season. We didn't get the Liberty Lynx round 2 that I think people who tuned in, if you tuned in to the finals last year as just kind of a casual, and that was the first sort of real extended WNBA basketball you watched, you probably were like, okay, yes, like I could watch these two teams do this 100 times. And I think the league would have loved that too. You mentioned, especially for New York, you mentioned there was in that piece, there wasn't as many the just total media at the finals this year was not as big as it was last year. And part of that is the New York bit. I think Minneapolis brings a lot of media to the table too, massive market. But where did it go wrong?
I think to interject about the Minneapolis market, like I feel like for the Lynx this year, it could be argued that there were more media covering the Lynx than even in that 2024 season. It to
Yeah.
me, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it just sort of seemed like because they made the finals and it was like this narrative of, oh yeah, this team's going to be even better. It's going to come back angry. The media from the 2024 finals carried over into that 2025 season.
Yeah. And I think that might have, if like the Lynx made the finals, but the Liberty didn't, as when the playoffs started, they were on the same side of the bracket. I think that could have happened. I think on like a day-to-day basis, it's still, pride myself on being there every day, but I don't need to be the only one who's there every day. My colleague Andrew Dukowitz, who writes for Zone Coverage Minnesota, there every day. We could get a few more people there every day. So I don't know if Cheryl and the Lynx players would say they were covered the same way, but I think kind of in the sort of like floating WNBA media stratosphere, the Lynx got more coverage. And then, Fee being on the cover of Slam early in the season was part of it. And then the stud buds of it all. I was being there, the stud buds of it all. Kind of like that, is an organic creation. And I think part of it, maybe like the fact that they had made the finals last year was relevant to an extent, but so many people found the stud buds who have never watched a basketball game before. So that's an ace in the hole that makes it really difficult to, if you're doing media tracking, it's pretty hard, I think, to find uh patterns. But a Lynx Liberty season would have been fun, and just kind of we didn't even get a single game this year with the two teams at full strength. Fee missed sometimes, Stewie missed all of the games, and I think there are still very good games for the most part, if I'm remembering each of them correctly. um but yeah, it's the whole them not meeting the playoffs and not getting to see a Fee Stewie game. It just felt like kind of a letdown.
Oh
And
yeah.
when they were both 9-0, I think we were on an episode of Locked On together, just going like, all right, like, let's go. We're going to be doing this for like 100 episodes in October sometime. And it just didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't. And I mean, I think your explanation or reminding the listeners about how these teams weren't at full strength when they played each other, I mean, I think that's sort of symbolic, at least for the New York of it all.
Mm-hmm.
The Liberty did not have the proper time to integrate all of the change that was going on. And they struggled to, when they lost the players that they lost the big stars. When their system was built around the um, the randomness and not set plays, like I always was sort of saying, okay, when Fee was out, how come the Lynx were able to really, still play at a high level? And it was because in the Lynx system, I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that it is built around the decision making of one player. Is
Correct.
that correct?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
And in the Liberty's case, they were trying to implement this new 5-out system in addition to it being, so reliant upon playing in random and playing in flow. And that was essentially, they took Stewie's strengths and created a new system around it. And when you have the player who your system is built around in such a profound way out for a month, how in the world are you supposed to adapt, especially when that player is coming back? Like what
Yeah.
Sandy Brondello had to deal with, where people were coming in and out. You cannot pivot like Stephanie White was able to successfully pivot when you have a basketball system like that, and when you have people that aren't out for the season. I mean, sure, we talk about how, oh my God, the Fever had 3 players out for the season. That is such an unfortunate situation, but it's also easier. It's easier when you're given, okay, these are the
They're
pieces you have.
they're done. Move on. We don't have a target date for them to come play and integrate again. Yeah, like, that makes sense.
It is, what the Liberty went through was so hard. It was so hard. And I just don't think that is talked about enough. I also think that when it comes to the roster construction, I did not think that Natasha Cloud was a 1-for-1 replacement for Benijah Hamilton. I never thought that, to be
No,
clear.
definitely different kinds of players.
I mean, I think Benijah Hamilton was such an important part of why they were able to do what they did in 2024. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, she is, when you think about the types of players you need next to Sabrina Ionescu,
Mm-hmm.
you need defensive players that can play offensively off the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And you need players who can just sort of do something one-on-one, when everyone's guarding Sabrina, Stewie, and JJ. Natasha Cloud is not that player. She's a driver, but she's not a great one-on-one player. She's a streaky shooter. She struggled to cut off the ball. These are the things I just mentioned that Natasha Cloud isn't. It's what Benija Laney Hamilton is. And so missing her in the backcourt was huge. It was absolutely huge. And Liberty general manager Jonathan Kolb admitted to this.
Yeah.
And so, you talked about Kelsey Mitchell and Caitlin Clark being in the backcourt and how tough that is defensively. With the Liberty, when you had Courtney Vandersloot next to Sabrina Ionescu, there were some difficulties defensively. But this year it was the inverse. It was Natasha Cloud and Sabrina Ionescu in the backcourt was difficult offensively. And so that was, I don't know if I want to say something new, but just the spacing wasn't great when you had Natasha Cloud and when you had people not willing to guard her. And sometimes those shots go in, but sometimes is not good enough,
Right.
especially for a team that was looking to repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
so continue. Yes.
no, Cheryl made a comment early in the season that I found funny. I'm forgetting the context, but it was just about like, oh, like, yes, I feel so bad for New York, with, tongue fully in cheek. So as I say, thank you for all of the information. You've made Lynx fans more aware of the struggles of New York this year, but I think gained zero sympathy from Lynx fans
Oh,
as of
no. Yeah.
um,
I mean, listen, even the thing with Emma Mieseman, the rivalry point
right.
about Emma Mieseman and how Cheryl was annoyed that the Liberty got Emma. And then when the teams played each other, Cheryl essentially, I think, designed a defensive scheme to exploit her, which worked.
It did.
And those are all fun rivalry points that didn't really germinate into the playoffs or anything like that. and
No, but
and
if
and
they
the
had met
thing,
in the finals, it would have been so fun.
I know, but the thing about Emma was that it was a lot for a coaching staff to handle. It's like, okay, you
Yeah.
have these injuries, you have these people coming in and out. You had Jonquil Jones, who was never really right. She just had surgery to stabilize that ankle. That was, a problem all year. Um, and then you bring just another player in. It's like, oh, we got to throw
Yeah.
something else at the ceiling.
It
Like
was
that is a lot to handle.
right.
And
Here's
they
the
chose
2019 finals MVP. Make it work.
that.
And it's
You're asking so much. You're also asking so much of a coach that was dealing with a lot personally. And
yeah.
so listen, I mean, I do not want to portray myself as a Sandy Brondello truther, but I more want to educate people on what was really going on behind the scenes. I mean, I wrote a
Yeah.
story profiling Sandy Brondello and why she is the way she is, her emotional intelligence, her ability to read situations. It's really quite unique in a
Mm-hmm.
coach, how she gets buy-in, all of these things. And I really found out a lot about something that was making the 2025 calendar year really hard for her. And so her mother passed away unexpectedly at the end of 2024, right after the Liberty won the championship. And, the funeral happened in early 2025. And she was carrying a lot of that weight throughout the regular season. I
Yeah.
even talked to her about it. And she talked about how there were so many times throughout the season where she just wanted to be able to pick up the phone and call her mom. And she realized that she couldn't because her mom wasn't
Yeah.
around anymore. And so, I understand this is professional sports. I understand that there is a very high standard when it comes to success and things like that. But it's tough when you see a coach that achieved something pretty big and then they go
Mhm.
through a pretty big loss. And then the season they have to coach is just everything is heavier
Yeah.
because of the loss, in addition to all of the injuries. It, it, it was just a lot for Sandy Brondello.
Right. And I understand that the roster constructed as it was heading into this season, but also last season, why it meant championship or bust for the coaching staff, essentially. And that makes sense when you have the players available, but in this season, you had Stewart hurt for much of it, probably not
John
playing
Quell, yeah.
100% for any of it. John Quell gone for, a month total, you know, but Nigel Laney Hamilton missing the entire season. I think
Sabrina
Sabrina
with her
missing the
foot in tow.
yeah. And I think also just real quick, the Kayla Thornton loss was huge too. That was Courtney Williams shouted out KT as like the main reason for her struggles, especially in the final game of the 2024 finals. And she was huge for the Valks until her injury this year. But like, how are you? I I've I was surprised that at the lack of surprise of Sandy getting fired pretty much right after the playoffs, even though I had been told last year that during the finals that if the Liberty didn't win the finals, that Sandy would have been out afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
by pretty reliable sources. But I still was just kind of like, what should Sandy had done better with everything we just mentioned? Like we just named multiple MVPs and MVP caliber player who were gone for stretches of this time. Um, I just don't understand it. There's no guarantee that whoever comes in is going to do a better job with it, even with all the resources there. As you know better than anyone, New York is a tough market to coach in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Sandy's strengths are that she is someone who is very level-headed. Um, and that was one of her strengths, which I also wrote about in that profile, which you can attach to the show notes as well.
I will.
But I think, and this goes back to another story I wrote, which was it was titled "Inside the Departure of Sandy Brondello," something along those lines. It was at the Nine Basketball. Yeah, inside Sandy Brondello's departure from the New York Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were irreconcilable differences that appeared between the coaching staff or between Sandy Brondello and the front office and the basketball operations staff and mainly general manager Jonathan Kolb. And it was about roster rotations. It was about substitutions. Sometimes Sandy has historically struggled with, sometimes just missing a proper defensive for offensive or offensive for defensive substitution. She's human. She's a very good coach, but she's human. Um, and she made a couple of those errors in pretty big moments. There's one that Lynx fans will remember quite well. The Courtney Williams 4-point play that sent the game into overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Sandy leaves Courtney Vandersloot out on the floor instead of bringing in Kayla Thornton, who, as you
Mm-hmm.
just said, Kayla
Yep.
Thornton was integral in tying
Ten,
Courtney Williams up.
tends to influence defensive possessions for the better.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was an example of a huge turning point. And then it's interesting, you flash forward to 2025, there was a game that the Liberty should have won against the Chicago Sky, and it was the game where Sabrina
Yeah.
injures her foot and Camila Cardozo steps on it. And what happened there, Sandy leaves Natasha Cloud out for too long, while you could bring in Maureen Johannes, who is a player who can make offensive possessions move in a different way. She can make things on offense happen a bit more than Natasha
Mm-hmm.
Cloud can. And so she failed to make that substitution. And that was just a pattern that, the Liberty's front office saw happen. So and using the bench as well. I mean, the huge issue in 2025, what really brought that to light was Brondello's use of Stephanie Talbot instead of Rebecca Gardner. And what what ended up happening was Brondello overcompensated and threw Gardner into the playoff rotation and took Maureen Johannes out of her spot. And so making all these decisions very quickly, that's a lot for players. And it is unclear as to how players responded to a lot of those quick changes. But Brondello was trying to do whatever she could to save her job. That was sort
Right.
of how it went. But in the end, I think Brondello realizes that it's probably the best for her and for her career, to start fresh. Um, it wasn't very ceremonious. And I think some of these irreconcilable differences, they can easily be hidden when you're winning. And when you win a championship, it would have looked ridiculous to fire your coach after winning a championship.
Right.
Just like it sort of looks ridiculous for for some people, it looks ridiculous for general manager Jonathan Kolb to say, two straight finals appearances would not have been enough. I also think that there is a understanding within the front office that the Liberty do not want to be a one-hit wonder. And while they did win the 2024 WNBA finals, the fact that it was so closely won and that very tight margin was something that I think the front office really wanted to change. They wanted to change that narrative. They want to have sort of what the Vegas Aces had, like a 4-0 sweep or a 3-1. Well, 3-1 isn't possible anymore now that we're in 7-game series, but 4-1, 4-0. I think the front office wanted to see more of a definitive win, if that makes sense.
Right.
And that is understandable. But at the same time, and this brings us into the coaching carousel of it all, the pipeline is really dry right now.
I was gonna say, is that coach out there, and are they
And
interested?
really good questions, Terry. You think about what a coach needs to be able to coach the New York Liberty. And if you'd like me to list out the characteristics, I can.
Quickly, because
I
we've
know.
been talking forever, which is a joy. And you'll
Yes.
be back on again soon. But yeah, just real quick, what do you think? Kind of the main things that because every job is different, but kind of what are the things that make this unique from say, the other jobs that are out there?
And you know what? I'll bring the Lynx into it too. I think the Lynx have a really interesting situation in that, you know, a lot of it is Cheryl is at the nucleus of how the front office runs and how the coaching staff runs. And it's very similar in Las Vegas, where Nikki Fargas is sort of like a general manager figure ish, but it's very much so Becky Hammon is the main decision maker. And so in New York, that is completely different. You have a very involved general manager in Jonathan Kolb, and that sort of makes what's needed for this job very different. So obviously, someone who is very good at handling high pressure situations because you're in New York, someone who is an excellent communicator and is very good at working with different personalities and superstars that have big personalities. You need someone who has a very, very high, um, I hate using the term basketball IQ. I'll say a coach that's very instinctual when it comes
Yes.
to understanding modern spacing principles. And someone who's really creative. You know, Essentially, you need everything that Becky Hammon was able to portray in her coaching of this past finals, in addition to someone who can handle the pressure of a New York market.
And someone who can work in concert with a GM who's maybe above them on the hierarchy of the organizational flowchart.
Correct.
Because that's definitely not the case in Minnesota. And I don't know if the New York Liberty want to try to make Cheryl the highest paid coach in the league by a mile. I'm sure she'd take that call. Uh,
I don't
I
know.
I don't know that that would be a match made in heaven. I don't think Cheryl should disrupt the system she's built here in any way.
I
Um,
don't think she wants to.
no, I don't mean to imply that she is like interested in anything else, but I do know that if there is a if Jonathan Kolb said, "Hey Cheryl, I'll make you the highest paid coach. Here's the number," it'd be like, "Oh, interesting." As anyone would take that phone call when that amount of money is involved. I'm not trying to hot take here. Don't come at me, Lynx fans. Cheryl's not leaving. I know. But we're just talking hypotheticals here. I don't know who the perfect coach for that is, and it's so much different. We have now one expansion team. Portland has their position filled. Toronto doesn't yet. uh, but as you reported, Sandy is a candidate in Toronto, Dallas, and Seattle for those positions. Knowing what we know about each of those jobs, which do you think would be the best fit for her? I kind of lean towards Seattle. Do you agree with that?
I lean toward Toronto
Okay.
because it would allow Sandy more control of building something, and there'd be less pressure. Like it is
Okay.
still, there would still be pressure because that ownership group means business. I mean, that Toronto
Yeah.
ownership group is
They're not
big.
here just to have a good time. Like
No,
they have eyes on winning and maybe paying Bridget Carlton in a ridiculous amount of money to get her to come back to Toronto. Uh,
but I
but yeah,
think I mean I think Toronto more wants to follow the path of the Valkyries. And
right,
so, you know, hiring Sandy, and especially you have a front office of Monica Rogers, who is, I believe, also a former player. You know, you'd have a woman in that, yeah, former player as well. Have a woman in that general manager role there, and I just think it gives Sandy a little bit more freedom to be able to build.
right,
So, you're literally starting from scratch, and essentially, okay, the ceiling is be one of the teams either that makes the playoffs, right at the bitter end, or a team that
right.
misses it by a hair. That should be the ceiling for the Toronto Tempo.
Okay. I mentioned Seattle because in my mind right now, Sandy and Skylar parted well, but I actually am not sure if that's true. Um, if like
It,
their relationship is still good, if it was always good, I
oh
don't
no,
have the
it
yeah, because I feel like
it
that reunion could work, but also maybe it's better
oh
to give her something that's more of a slow play.
yeah, I mean, I think it does. I think Sandy's going to have a choice because I think there are people around the league that value her credentials and
Hmm.
value what she's been able to do being in the league. And, two championships won is not something to scoff at,
Absolutely not.
amid the asterisk of, oh, the Liberty played with their food in that 5-game finals against the Lynx and didn't win definitively, or there was complacency amongst the superstars. And someone who has won 2 championships and has made as many playoff appearances that she has, and who has won Olympic gold, not Olympic gold, Olympic medals in general.
Right.
That is someone that, as an expansion franchise, you would want to come in and coach your team.
For sure. It'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. Um, all right. Next segment, figuring out the CBA. Just kidding. We're not doing that today. This is not a 8-hour episode of Links Happy Hour. Jackie, you've been very, very generous with your time and your thoughtfulness as always. So thank you
Oh my
so
gosh.
much for coming on the show. We're gonna do this again in the off season, I promise. Um,
Yeah, especially with there's so much to catch up on the CBA. I see Ben Pickman has something new at The Athletic
ooh,
and reporting about a meeting, and Howard Megdal has a column about Kathy Engelbert's standing in the league's future. There's a lot of stuff floating
there's
around,
a
but
lot of reading material out
mhm.
there. I'll go read both of those right after this. Linking to a number of your brilliant pieces in the show notes, but where can people follow you, find you? What's the best way to consume all of the great Jackie Powell content that's all over the interwebs?
You can find me at the Nine Basketball, where a lot of my Liberty reporting lives. You can also find some of my work at NBCSports.com, where I'm helping to build some of their WNBA coverage and just really educate their readers on what this league is about. Um, you can also find me on Blue Sky /X/Threads at the handle Classic J Pow. So those are a lot of places to find me.
Awesome. Thank you again, Jackie, for being here. I hope someday we can get an off-season episode where there's less to do and we can just do a little basketball talk and then wax poetic about Lady Gaga or something. But
Oh.
that's in a future world where we have clarity with a brand new CBA that's fair for everyone, and we have plenty of time to get ready for the finals or the next season and also sleep. So dare to dream, I guess.
Dare to dream. I love
Right.
that. Well, thank you very much, Terry. I appreciate getting this opportunity.
For sure. Thank you as always, my friend. Thank you again to Jackie Powell for taking so much time to hang out with us today. That's Jackie Powell at Classic J Pow across social media channels. And thank you, dear listener, for hanging with us for another episode of Links Happy Hour. Hope you are enjoying the autumnal vibes out there today, Friday, October 24th. Perfect fall day in Minneapolis right now. So I hope you are enjoying the same perfection wherever in the world you may be tuning in from. To this episode of Links Happy Hour, the podcast where Links basketball is always on special. You have been excellent as always. I have been Terry Horstman. I'll see you all again soon. Tune in again next week for a brand new episode of Links Happy Hour. And until then, have a great weekend, everyone.